Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hope everybody's doing well. Whatever your different part of the world that you're in, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, I just want to say welcome. For those who are new, this channel, Freedom Fighters, is dedicated to the gospel of Jesus Christ and the expression of it. And I just hope everybody gets a chance to check out the old material that's out. For those who has been watching, as always, thank you for tuning in and to spreading the gospel and being able to get enlightened and empowered by the truth from the Word of God. So for those, all I ask is just go ahead and subscribe, go ahead and hit the bell, go ahead and get the notifications going, and always please share and send the material out. So today we're going to talk about creating an Ishmael. I'm going to break down the scriptures. I'm going to read constant scriptures that is going to pertain to what I want to talk about. It's a huge chapter in the book of Genesis. It's going to start in Genesis 16, and it's going all the way to Genesis 21. I'm reading from the Amplified, so it can get me the breakdown. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and read the scriptures, and then I'm going to go ahead and kind of explain and kind of give the idea of what I'm trying to talk about. So just kind of going to be kind of a lengthy video, but I want to take the time to actually break this down. So we're going to start from Genesis chapter 16, and I'm going to read the concentration scriptures. It's going to be 1 through 8, and it's in the Amplified. And before I start, I just want to make sure that those understand this is breakdown. So it's not going to be the whole entire chapter and verse by verse. So I'm going to go ahead and put the scriptures in the comments. And also, I'm going to call the scriptures out so you can go back and study for yourself. Again, always study the scriptures for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. So I'm going to go ahead and read. Now Sarah, or Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "See here, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. I'm asking you to have intercourse with my maid. It may be that I can obtain children by her." And Abram listened to and heeded what Sarai said. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her Egyptian maid, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his secondary wife or wife. And he had intercourse with Hagar, and she became pregnant. And when she saw that she was with child, she looked with contempt upon her mistress and despised her. Then Sarai said to Abram, "May the responsibility for my wrong and deprivation of rights be upon you. I gave my maid into your bosom, and when she saw that she was with child, I was contemptible and despised in her eyes. May the Lord be the judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "See here, your maid is in your hands and power. Do as you please with her." And when Sarai dealt severely with her, humbling and afflicting her, she, Hagar, fled from her. But the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water into the wilderness on the road to Shur. And he said to Hagar, Sarah's maid, "Where did you come from, and where are you intended to go?" And she said, "I'm running away from my mistress Sarah." So this is a breakdown of disobedience from Sarah. Sarah, I didn't say disobedience, but she was more or less in her feelings about not having a baby, right? So instead of waiting on God to provide instruction on how this is going to go, which we go into later in the chapters, she decides to go ahead and move over tells Abraham, or to him, go ahead and create a child through Hagar. So that's the first thing with that, is understanding that when we look at God, it's two ways. It's God's will, and then there's the will outside of God, right? So in this case, not only did Abram agree to it, but then he didn't stand by and wait on God to give him instruction at the time, and he went ahead and did it. So in that case, we think about, the first thing is we stepped outside of God's will. He didn't wait on God. He was communing with God, but he went ahead and stepped aside of God's will to have Ishmael. All right. And how many times in our lives have we stepped outside of the will of God to have an Ishmael? All right. In the sense of not the child was the issue in the story, but it was the consequences and the choices that we made, the impatience and the lack of trust in what God has given us. So if God give us a will and give us a instruction on assignment, or he even give us some type of guidance, we need to stand by and we need to go ahead and follow it. So as you continue to read, the contempt, which basically means disdain or lack of care, right? And you had contempt in his heart, right? From Hagar and Sarah, that she saw that she had a child. It was more or less You can say jealousy. You can say envy in that sense, and contempt. But instead of her being happy, right? Instead of her, being happy for Hagar in the sense of that this is what she wanted, she went ahead and started issues with Hagar, right? And then it blamed Abraham and said that it's going to be on him for her decisions. The lack of leadership with Abram at the time. I said Abraham. Abraham's name's been changed later, but right now we're talking about Abram. The lack of leadership and saying, hey, I'm going to wait on God, that was on him as well as on Sarai for even coming up with the idea. So again, we create Ishmaels and we bring this stuff onto ourselves. How many times have we created, made choices outside of the will of God that led to issues in relationships, issues at just choices in general, right? The Ishmael concept, that Ishmael going outside of God's will, it adds extra drama. Now, in this story, as you continue to read, Ishmael was still blessed, but it was a lot of issues in between that conflict. It was a lot of different issues with Hagar and Abram and Sarai, right? So we got to understand that when we make decisions outside of God's will, it's going to be consequences with that. It's going to be issues with that, right? And we got to be able to stay with God and get in between, his will, get in his will, get in presence, get in prayer, seek him and have patience and trust his word. A lot of times with this story, a lot of things are common. It's a lot of different nuggets in here. But one of the things I've noticed as I was looking at it was a lot of impatience. There was a lot of, lack of faith at the time, trusting God and following him. And no matter how long the promise took, they should have stayed faithful. And they didn't. That's why the Ishmael concept was created. So now I'm in Genesis 17. I'm going to read 15 through 18. All right, this is where the name changed, right? God said to Abraham, now it's Abraham now, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah, which means princess. Her name shall be, and I'll bless her and give you a son also by her. Yes, I will bless her. And she shall be a mother of many of nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a son? And he said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. So this is now in the point where God speaks and creates a covenant with Abraham, which covenant means a pledge or a solemn pledge or agreement. So now this is where God's communicating with Abraham and establishing the fact that he's going to be the father of many nations, not just an exalted father, which is Abram. And now he also claims that Sarah is going to have Isaac. But then this is where we talk about the faith issue. He laughed, right? He said, I'm going to have a baby when I'm old, So now and God reassured them and said, yes, you will have a son. She will have a son in your older years, and she will as well. So at the time when someone's barren and they're older, that means they can't have kids, right? So, but God, it tells that God can do anything. God is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. He can do all things. So when we're thinking about God in our lives, what are some things that are impossible that you think it's impossible? Are you going to be like Abraham and laugh and say, I'm going to not believe or have my unbelief, or I'm going to trust God with the promise that he's given me? I'm going to trust God and stay focused on him no matter how long the promise takes, no matter how long it seems impossible. We don't go with our natural eyes. We go with our spiritual eyes. We go with the word of God. So we got to be able to understand this story and how Ishmaels are created because we don't trust his promises. We don't trust what the word says, and we don't trust, we don't know how to live by faith and not by sight. So this scriptures I just read, it just talks about how Sarah at one point also didn't believe, and now Abraham laughed as well. And that's why God told Abraham and Sarah to name Isaac, which means laughter. All right. So, and you go in verse 19, I'm going to go ahead and read this. It says, but God said, Sarah, your wife shall bear you a son indeed, and you shall call his name Isaac, laughter, and I will establish my covenant or solemn pledge with him. So, it's important to understand that, that we have to trust God no matter how it looks. We got to trust God in everything that we're doing, because if not, we go ahead and go ahead of God and not, pace ourselves with him and not walk with him and not trust him to guide us and mold us and shape us into the things that we need to be in order to receive the promise. Then guess what happens? We create Ishmaels. All right, so now moving on to Genesis 18. Moving on to Genesis 18. And it's going to start explaining more. 18, I'm reading 13 to 14. It's going to explain more of how this stuff took a turn. And this is now, and then this is before he's, now she told Sarah, they were advancing years. I think this is after Abimelech's situation. And therefore he says, now Abraham and Sarah were old. This is verse 11. I'm going to go ahead and read up. Well advancing years, and it has ceased to be with Sarah as with young women. She was past the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed to herself. This is again this with this laughter, saying, after I have become aged, shall I have pleasure and delight my Lord husband, being old also. And the Lord asked Abraham, why does Sarah laugh, saying, shall I really bear a child when I'm so old? Is anything too hard or too wonderful for the Lord? At the appointed time, when the season for her delivery comes around, I will return to you, and Sarah shall have born a son. Now, this is important because we go back to verse 17 where we talk about Abraham, and he said he laughed. And now we jump to verse 18, where it also shows unbelief again, where Sarah laughed. And then again, it shows Lord's patience. It shows God's patience with us when we don't believe. But the establishment of people not believing and having faith and patience, it shows in the beginning. That's why Ishmaels are so important to understand. We can't, go ahead of God when we have something in mind. When he gives us a promise, we want to go ahead and rush. We want to go ahead and go in a faster pace and get ahead of God and try to do what he said for ourselves. And when we do that, we create Ishmael. So this shows that not only did Abraham didn't believe, Sarah didn't either. And they looking at the physical. We're looking at the carnal, that I'm old and that I'm beyond my years of childbearing. So I'm going to assume that God is just like, yeah, whatever. All right. And then it goes in 14. It says, is anything too hard and wonderful for God? How many times? Let's ask ourselves the same question. Is anything in our lives too hard or too wonderful for the Lord? What are some things in our lives that we say is too hard? Oh, he's not going to do it. I'm looking at the physical sense. If I'm sick, I'm looking at the physical sense. I may not think I'm not getting better, or this financial situation, my bills are due. They don't look like it's going to happen, or or my kids acting up, or my spouse, or my friends, or whatever's not getting saved, whatever the situation may be. I'm going to believe my situation more than I believe God. I'm going to have faith in my situation than I'm more having God. What is something in our lives as people that we feel like it's too hard for God, that it seems so impossible, that my unbelief is so much more than the faith in God? The scripture clearly states the hearts of Abraham and Sarah. And when we talk about the heart, we talk about what we think, not just what we think in our minds, but what's in our hearts. What do we truly believe? What is in our soul realm? Our feelings, our emotions, our will, our ambitions, our memories. Everything consists of the heart. What is it in our hearts that we don't believe? Deep down. Because remember, God searched the heart. So he knows what you feel like you believe and what you don't believe. So in this context of Abraham and Sarah, they saying that they laughed. And even in 15, then Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. God saw her heart. She saw it. He saw her heart. So in that context, that I just said before, that God sees it. So we got to be able to check our hearts, and we got to be able to walk in faith, even if it don't be seen. So Genesis 21, we're going to go ahead and skip to Genesis 21. And this is the last part. So give me a second. Genesis 21, we're going to read 9 through 14. This is the last section, but it's all going to tie it in. And again, you can read for yourself. I'm going to put the contents in the comment section, all the chapters in the scriptures, and you can take a look for yourself and read it so you can get a full understanding of what's happening between Abraham and Sarah. So again, verse 9, now Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, who she had born to Abraham, mocking Isaac. Therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be in a heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very grievous, means serious and evil in Abraham's sight on account of his son Ishmael. God said to Abraham, do not let it seem grievous and evil to you because of the youth and your bondwoman. And all that Sarah has said to you, do what she asked, for in Isaac shall your posterity be called. And I will make a nation of the son of the bondwoman also, because he is offspring. He is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulders. And he sent her and the youth away. and she wandered on aimlessly and lost her way in the wilderness of Beersheba. That's something that we go back to verse 11. Abraham has feelings, and although he had Isaac, and Isaac's covenant is going to be God's covenant was going to be established to Isaac and the nations, and God had a purpose for Isaac because it's within covenant, and God told Abraham he's going to start with Isaac. And although Ishmael was outside the God's will, he was still blessed. But Abraham had feelings and emotions for Isaac. I'm sorry, for Ishmael, because he was his son. And this is something so important, because we got to look at verse 11, and that, Sarah wanted to cast out Ishmael because she didn't want him to receive the promises that God's given him, which already God told him that. But the fact that Isaac came from home womb, and that Ishmael was mocking or aggravating or irritating Isaac, it shows that in our lives, what Ishmael in our lives is mocking and irritating our Isaac promise, or what God has set before us. What have we done outside of God's will that continues to hold his promises back that God has for us? What relationship we're in that holds us back? What job are we in that holds us back? What addiction or what issue in our hearts is holding us back? What childhood trauma or anything that's not godly holding us back from our Isaac promise, and mocking it and saying and picking on it and irritating it? One thing I say about Sarah, she saw that and she said, you got to go. She had to send. She wanted Abraham to send Ishmael away because it's not God's promise. And it grieves Abraham, and it made him upset, and it made him angry, because in the day he's still part. He wanted to hold on to that wasn't God's. God said, don't get upset that he's going to bless him anyway. That's the grace and mercy of God. He's going to bless Ishmael anyway, but it wasn't God's promise. So what are we holding on to that's allowing us to grieve over that we should let it leave so God's promise can come in and manifest in our lives? What are we holding on to that's causing us to be stuck? And this is important because although Abraham didn't want Ishmael to leave, he had to do it under God's order, as well as his wife, to release Ishmael away into the wilderness and allow Isaac's promise, or Isaac, to become a part of the fold. And that's when the covenant would begin with Abraham and Isaac. And then it continued from Isaac on down. So even with Hagar's position, she cried out to God, and she saw the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord guided her and kept her, and even gave her water in the desert, in the wilderness, and at the beginning, to make sure that she was strengthened and reassured that God was going to bless not only her, but Ishmael. All right. So between Genesis 16 to Genesis 21, it was a lot of drama. It was a lot of contentment. It was a lot of just back and forth between Sarah and Hagar and Abraham. And as the leader of the home, this is another topic for another day, but I will say this: with Abraham, he not only, lied for himself with Abimelech, when he was with Abimelech, and lied on Sarah to tell her that he was a sister instead of his wife, but his leadership skills at the beginning probably could have prevented this happening if he would have took leadership and said, no, I'm going to stand what God told me. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to go and follow God. I'm going to be a blameless, upright, man of God. And was told Sarah, no, I'm not going to go against what he said. And it may be that we go back and read. God may have not told him yet he was going to be a father of many nations, but it was told to him at that point that he was going to be the father of many nations, and it's going to come through Isaac. End of the day, Abraham subjected himself to having an Ishmael situation. Ishmael is more headaches. Again, we're not talking about, so if we have a baby out of wedlock, we're not talking about that baby, right? we're talking about the situation and going outside of God's will. It don't even have to be in relation to children. It could be you going to the wrong job and God told you to wait. It could be going to the wrong college. It could be starting a business prematurely. It could be spending prematurely, or doing something outside of God's will, and not consulting him and not seeking him and walking with him so he can give you the guidance and instructions to do what you've been asked to do. So when I created this context, because I see a lot of it. I know in my own life, I had a lot of Ishmaels, and a lot of it is because I didn't sit and understand that I can't go outside of God's what he says. I can't just jump ahead and think on my own understanding. To go ahead and create something and do something without the context of God and what he says. It's just, that's just what it is with that, with Ishmael. And Ishmael was blessed, and it describes him in the book of Genesis, in those from 16 to 21, and how he was archer, he was wild, he was out of control, but he was blessed, and he had a multitude of he had been fruitful and multiply. God still blessed him. It shows the grace and the mercy. Although you outside of covenant and doing things outside of God, he still works it out according to the good for those who love him, called according to his purpose. The New Testament explains that, right? And this is an example of God showing mercy and still allowing those outside his covenant to be blessed. But in the sense of, we have to do, if you want God's best, you have to do things God's way. Abraham and Sarah taught us that although they were impatient and had unbelief, that, this is the consequences of that. You have heartaches and headaches. You have drama. You get in your feelings. You have a lot of extra headaches you don't need if you just stay with God and follow his instruction. But with sin and what we're leading into our own understanding, we go out here and create Ishmaels, or we create situations that like represents an Ishmael. It's not outside of God's covenant. So that's kind of the gist of this. And as I say, study the scripture for yourself. Go into Genesis 15, start a couple chapters in the beginning and read all the way from 16 Genesis all the way to the end of 21. And just read that whole section from 16 to 25, and just read the whole story of Abraham and Sarah. And this talks about Lot. It talks about the situation with Abraham and Lot, and then the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. But in between the context, I want to talk about Ishmael. And it's so relational to our lives that a lot of times, a lot of people are in the situations and the consequences that they're in because they decided to not seek God. They went off their own free will, and they made a decision based off their feelings, emotions, and their understanding and their knowledge, instead of seeking God. When you leave God out of stuff, that's when we have consequences. When we leave God out of our lives and out of our decision making, that's when we make decisions on our own and we fail. So that's kind of all I have. I wanted to kind of just not make it too long, but I was going to break it down. I hope that got some fruit, get something out of this. Think about and reflect on your lives and see how many Ishmaels that we had in our lives. So that's kind of all I have. I'm going to do some stuff on the RBC channel. I'm going to go ahead and start working on no knock warrants. There's a lot of stuff going on with the George Floyd trial, the jury selection, and now the trials are starting to begin. So I don't know if people want to check it out. I may do some coverage and footage on it once it's over. I may get some highlights from it. Check out the material on RBC. I'm going to start working on a series for love. God's been dealing with me on the concept of love and checking the hearts of man on that. Its title is going to be called "Do You Love Me?" And I'm going to break it up into maybe 3 or 4 part series. And I'm going to start really breaking down the concept of love for ourselves, love for God, love for others, and being able to minister love in a whole context. 4 different perspectives of love. I'm going to talk about it. So that's kind of what I'm going to go next into next season, and start to break that down. And I'm going to continue to do some work on the channel. So I hope you get something out of this. Also, again, I finally got some poetry going that I may present in the near future. I'm just tweaking some stuff, but I want to start doing poetry and just expressing my praise and my worship to God through poetry and prose. So I do have some stuff I already jotted down and took some time to work on. So maybe in the near future, I'm going to start presenting the materials. Don't forget about Spotify. Don't forget about SoundCloud. Don't forget about the merchandise for RBC, and still got this stuff available if anybody want merchandise. I'm also working on some new clothing line material, so I'm going to start doing that as well. Got a lot of stuff coming out, a lot of stuff still pushing. So stay tuned. Please subscribe. Please share. And I hope someone gets something out of this. So as always, thank you for tuning in, and be blessed and have a good day.